Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Think BRICS YouTube channel. I am super thrilled today to welcome Dr. Radhika Desai on to discuss for today. For those who are not aware, Dr. Radhika is a professor at Department of Political Science at the University of Manitoba, Winnipeg, Canada. She's also the director of Geopolitical Economy Research Group. And when she is not, she's also written many books, such as the book called Geopolitical Economy. And when she's not publishing these books, she's also serving on the editorial boards for many journals, such as the Canadian Political Science Review. She earned her bachelor's degree in political studies at the University of Baroda, India, and earned her master's and PhD at Queen's University in political studies. Thank you so much, Radhika, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Ben. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, of course. I'm so happy to have you on. You really have made such a seismic impact, especially in the latter years, last 8 years, because of your impact on geopolitical economy and how we're really seeing it unfold in the world today. So I want to just get your first question about what's happening in the United States right now. So President Donald Trump, for all of his, bolstering and all of his propping up of how he wants to use tariffs to be the great equalizer in bilateral trade, we're seeing him use this tactic and threatening tariffs in areas such as the strikes in Iran, to his issues now with Russia and China, for example. So what do you think his real motive is behind using these tariffs?
I would say that, most people seem not to understand just how much tariffs for Donald Trump are really about making a great big show in order for the people who vote for him to feel that he's doing something to address their concerns. I mean, basically, Donald Trump represents the same ruling class of the United States as Biden did, as Harris might have if she had been elected, and as all the entire slew of American presidents in recent decades have done. So, real difference between Donald Trump and Joe Biden is that Donald Trump realized that you cannot win elections by telling Americans that their economy is doing very well. So he told them the truth, that the economy is not doing well, that he recognized that they are suffering. But of course, if you're going to represent the same capitalist class as Biden, then you have to tell the cost of telling this truth is that you have to tell an even bigger lie. So the even bigger lie was that the United States he didn't tell people the truth, which is that they were suffering because of 40 plus years of neoliberal policies which have made deindustrialized America, financialized America, made America more unequal than ever, all of the things that go along with it, created enormous social divisions and so on. So he didn't tell them that. Instead, he said to them, you are suffering because of China, because of trade, because of immigrants. So everything that he's done under the rubric of make America great again, allegedly claiming to reindustrialize America, etc., is nothing but an inordinate show in order to make it look as though he's doing something to address people's concerns. But in reality, these tariffs are not going to reindustrialize America because while tariffs are an important part of any strategy to industrialize the United States, those tariffs would have had to be selective, not blanket like Trump is imposing. Plus, they would have had to be associated with some kind of industrial strategy, which Trump does not have. And he cannot have simply because he understands, as far as I can tell, he understands his job to be to promote the interests of the very big corporations that essentially bankrolled him and are now willing to support him. There were some who didn't, but they've now come around. So he will do what they want, essentially. And so that's also explains the on again, off again nature of the tariffs. What people are now calling taco. Trump always chickens out because the fact is that the overwhelming majority of the American capitalist class, the biggest corporations, rely on supply chains that are very, very long and they extend all over the world, and tariffs would hurt them too. So, what we've seen is relatively limited tariffs, and they are all still, as I say, on again, off again. And yeah, so, and of course, there's another element, which is that, Trump wants to reduce income taxes further. Of course, every American president since Ronald Reagan in modern times has been reducing taxes for the rich people, for big corporations, etc. And Trump wants to slash them even further, despite the fact that the reductions in taxes has actually created a very, very big fiscal problem for America. It has given America a very big debt, but he wants to continue doing that. And the claim that tariff revenues will somehow compensate for the tax breaks he's not given in his big beautiful bill to big corporations is it's part of the narrative as well. So to me, the tariff strategy, as far as there is one of the Trump administration, is all performative. It's all for show.
I definitely gotta write down the TACO acronym because that's definitely gonna help me moving down the line. And it's funny too because you see like he wants to market himself as such a chief negotiator, and when and he all he was talking about was trying to end the war in Ukraine in a day, using his as a big businessman he's going to use these chief negotiating tactics, and he has completely failed on all of the promises on the he's completely failed on the tariff promises. He's completely failed on promising to end the war in Ukraine. And all of the unpredictability and kind of this crazy nature of how the tariffs are acted and repealed and so on and so forth. It's really impacting the supply chains, like you were saying, but also the businesses that are within those supply chains because they don't know how much things are going to cost a month, 2 months from now. So, how do you see that really pivoting businesses and other nations towards countries like BRICS or like institution like BRICS in particular?
Well, I think that first of all, a couple of things. First of all, I just wanted to say, since you mentioned his wars, Trump was elected on a peace ticket. As you know, people in the United States are fed up of wars. They have nothing to gain from them, really. Ordinary people, I mean. And so he was elected by saying, I'm going to solve the Gaza crisis. And of course, the Ukraine crisis, he even said that I'm going to resolve it within 24 hours of being elected, not even taking office. And all of this has proved very elusive for Donald Trump. And the reason is very simple. The reason is that Trump basically imagines that somehow if he just kind of says all let's just jolly everyone along and he will get sort of a peace deal. You remember in his first term there was all of that very entertaining sort of shenanigans around him and Kim Jong Un. With one day Trump calling Kim Jong Un Rocket Man, and the guy returning the compliment by calling Trump a dotard, and then the next day saying, "Oh, we love each other and we're going to come up with this great deal." Well, Trump just did not appreciate the underlying problems, exactly how much effort and how many concessions it would take for America to negotiate a peace deal with North Korea or any other country for that matter. So basically, he massively underestimates the problems, and then of course he doesn't get a peace deal, which he hasn't. Of course, in the case, of course, very briefly, he managed to inveigle Israel into creating a ceasefire for some days, but it has not lasted, and Gaza is in worse problems than ever before. And the US public is turning against it, but they continue to support this. But anyway, what I'm saying is that Trump, and of course, he would dearly love to win the Nobel Peace Prize, which is why he is engaged in all these shenanigans. And he keeps saying that he's a man of peace, but it's going to elude him because these wars are continuing, because he underestimates what it would take to end them. And now, of course, there is the additional complication of these Epstein files. But anyway, I just wanted to, which many commentators would suggest have something to do with essentially Epstein having some compromat on not only Democrats but also Republicans, which means that it's quite if it were the case that this is the kind of thing that is keeping American policy from fighting shy of stopping Israel, because they could stop Israel tomorrow by simply stopping the flow of funds, the flow of weapons, etc. And that's not, they're not doing that. But anyway, that's to the aside. But now, in terms of big American corporations, I would say, and the effects of tariffs and so on, I guess I would say three things. First of all, when the campaign was going on, and I was writing about this in various points and speaking about it, and there was at least some evidence that the American corporate capitalist class, if one may put it that way, is divided. The American ruling class, which is the corporate capitalist class, is divided between, what some people call the kind of establishment corporations, which were basically siding with Biden, and then the kind of mavericks like Peter Thiel and, other such people. I forget their names off the top of my head, but, the kind of more maverick type of CEOs who want, even more unbridled neoliberalism. There was some sort of divide among them. And certainly it's the case that the Mavericks bankrolled Trump in his victory, and the other guys were still essentially behind Biden and then Harris. But what we saw after Trump was elected, what is that, something really, the fact that he was elected with such a substantial margin, which is entirely, by the way, due to the fact that the Democrats didn't have the nerve to choose somebody more radical. They went with Biden at first and then went with Harris. But anyway, the fact that he won with such a large margin through the Democratic Party has thrown the Democratic Party into a disarray from which it's going to take them a long time to recover. The election or the near election of Zoran Mamdani in New York is not going to help, not because Mamdani does not represent a promising way forward, I think he does, but because the Democrats are not they're simply not geared to acknowledging that and moving forward with that. But so the ruling class realizes that they can't bank on the Democrats to win the next election, which means that even those bits of the ruling class that were once against Trump have now come around to it, and the evidence was all there in the inauguration ceremony, where basically they were all more or less there. So by that time, Trump had basically managed to rally them all around himself. So I think that, Trumpism is, whether Trump, runs again, I don't know how he would do so, but whether Trump is president after 3 more years or 3.5 more years, we will see. But what we do know is that the Democrats are not doing well, and the American capitalist class seems to have united behind Trump. Now, the second thing I want to say is that, of course, the tariffs are going to hurt them. They're already hurting them. The United States economy is not doing well. Yes, of course, a certain amount of tariff revenue has been raised, which has been much in the news, but essentially, the effect of all of this has actually been not so much to raise tariffs themselves, thanks to the taco factor, not necessarily to raise a tariff revenue. Of course, it will have gone up a lot. But what the main effect of all this is going to be that the corporate ruling class is going to hurt from tariffs. The economy is going to do a lot worse. Ordinary people will be paying the cost of tariffs because the price of things will go up, inflation will go up, and so on. So all of this is that's the second thing I want to say. So the ruling class is going to try to get Trump to reduce the tariffs because they were so reliant on world trade, and they can't suddenly give that up. It would take a long time for them to reorient their strategy. And then the third thing I want to say is that as far as the world is concerned, it seems that to the world, it's not this or that tariff that the Trump administration is imposing. It's not this or that concession that the Trump administration may be making. It is the uncertainty, the prolonged uncertainty of dealing with an unpredictable administration led by an unpredictable man. And the realization that even if Trump does not run again, this unpredictability will continue. Because one of the other things I've pointed out at various points is that Trump is not an actor in this situation. He won the election by telling American voters that he's going to solve their problems. He cannot solve their problems. They're not in his power to solve, not least because he's still wishing to serve the interests of the very richest people in the United States. So he cannot solve the problem. So he's really a symptom. He is being buffeted about by the same forces that permitted somebody like him, a charlatan, a rather despicable figure like him, to get elected in the first place. So Trump, it will not be able to solve this. So the rest of the world knows that this uncertainty, which comes from deep problems and contradictions and crises that are assaulting American society, economy, politics, etc., they're not going to go away, even if Trump goes away. So that means that over time, the rest of the world is going to move away from engagement with the United States of any sort, whether it is trade relations, investment relations, any other kind of relations. And of course, there the BRICS will play an important role. They are among the most powerful economies, but there I should make one important proviso. We use the term BRICS, but to me, there's China, and then there's the rest of the BRICS. To some extent, sorry, I should revise that. There's China. To a lesser extent now, particularly since 2022, particularly since 2014, there's Russia, because under the impact of sanctions, Russia has emerged as a fairly resilient and in many ways even full economy. The agricultural sanctions, which were originally imposed in 2014, for example, have made Russian agriculture, have revived Russian agriculture and made Russia into one of the major agricultural exporters in the world. So, Russia and China are in one category, and then everybody else is in the other category. And they are not doing so well, I'm sorry to say, despite talk about, equating in China and India, for example, there is really no comparison. So, nevertheless, the BRICS countries, of course, will be in the forefront of this reorientation. So essentially, the effect of all this will be that the rest of the world will move away from the United States in terms of their engagement. And one final point is that one fact that will make this reorientation very easy is the following. If you look at the proportion of world imports that the US accounts for, depending on how you're counting it, it is somewhere between 16% and 10%. So 10% or 16% even is not a small number, but it's not so high either. So barring Canada and Mexico, which over the last several decades have hitched their wagon to the US horse, all other countries will suffer a shock, of course, but they are more able to reorient away from the United States, especially the bigger economies, than the rest of the world. I mean, of course, some countries will suffer a lot, but so they will be able to reorient away. And I would say that all of these shenanigans will basically leave the US economy high and dry, with the rest of the world not willing to engage with it.
Yeah, and I think what we're really seeing right now is with Trump's relying really on dollar really as this kind of chief negotiating tactic. Regardless, you could copy and paste it into every single scenario, and when they realize that it's not having nearly as big of effect as advertised, really, it's just showing that the emperor has no clothes. Like if this is the biggest weapon that the United States has, really, because from a military aspect, it seems like they are being outclassed by countries like China and Russia right now. When their best weapon's not working, there's really not much that they can necessarily do openly that's really going to deter anyone from reorienting their relationship from the United States to BRICS countries, or even just kind of a multipolar system where they aren't as reliant on the United States as they normally would. And to your point about the impact on sanctions with Russia, they have all been heavily sanctioned on much of their key exports. We were talking about Russia with agriculture, Iran with oil. We could talk about China and how basically how the Chips Act basically banned them from getting the highest powered semiconductor chips, and it had the reverse effect that they thought it would have. And these sanctions have made their economies more resilient at the end of the day, and they know because they're in that position that they're not just gonna they're not going to curl up in the fetal position and let the United States do whatever they want. They're going to adapt, and they're going to build, like China, for example, building semiconductor chips that are even smaller and more powerful than what we've already seen up to this point. Um, and I want to ask your opinion about Following the BRICS summit in Brazil, we had like the president of Chile, as well as countries like Uruguay, also attending the summit. I've honestly argued that Chile will be involved in BRICS as an official member at some point in time. But we see that Chile has a pretty tumultuous history, especially with respect to the United States. So I guess what I want to ask is when we see countries try to reposition their relationship, how do you think they're going to kind of balance, especially towards the North America, South America? How are they going to balance that relationship with the United States because they are that much closer and that much more reliant on them, but also keeping in mind their, quite frankly, economic security and development in mind? How are they going to keep that relationship in mind as they sort of pivot over in the future?
Well, I think that if you look at the statistics now, except as I say for Canada and Mexico, I would say that for most countries in the Americas, China has already become the most important trading partner. China has already become the most important economic partner. So there, I think that to the extent that there is a problem there, it is that of course China is such a huge manufacturing power that it has had the effect, the closer relationships between the Americas, the countries of the Americas, and China has had the effect of, as some people call it, some economists of Latin American economists call it, reprimarization. So it has tended to reprimarize, that is to say, make them more reliant on primary production, so whether it is agriculture or mining rather than on manufacturing. And I think that for there to be a long sustained healthy and mutually beneficial relationship between the Latin American countries and China, they are simply going to have to undertake simply going to have to essentially replicate what China has done. China has transformed itself from a primarily agrarian economy over the last 30 or 40 years into a huge industrial powerhouse. And I think that these countries can also do something similar, so to the extent that they need, because in addition to exporting primary products, they also need to be able to export other things and produce other things, to have a diversified economy. So I think so long as they can do that, such that their relations with China are not based on persistent deficits and persistent deficits on their side and persistent surpluses on China's side. I think that this relation, and I think China will play an important role in that. China will probably be able to help them do that because China does not want to have an imbalanced relationship with anybody. So I think that this is what I mean, these are the tasks that face countries in the Americas seeking to reorient away from the United States. For the rest, I would say that the resistance will come, especially in the big Latin American countries like Brazil. Obviously, well, Mexico is a much different case, but certainly Brazil and other big countries, Argentina, Chile, is that the ruling classes of these countries are still too invested in the US in particular, but more specifically in the US dollar denominated financial system, because that's where they hide their ill-gotten gains. And so and they are very, very powerful in these countries. So any such change as I'm referring to will have to challenge the power of these elites. And the question is how this will be done.
Yeah, and I find it, we talk a lot about the impact of, when we're talking about obviously King Dollar really being used in these tactics. I think that's obviously people understand why the de-dollarization really with bilateral trade is something that has spooked Trump really and has made him threaten these 100% tariffs and so on and so forth because he knows that his most powerful weapon is not going to work when everyone's trading in their own mutual currencies. And when we're looking at kind of do you imagine it's going to be a uh, do you imagine it's going to like this kind of are we going to have sort of a BRICS dollar really where it's going to kind of be like a BRICS currency itself that is a basket of all of their other currencies? Do you see it more as with a lot of the gold that a lot of the BRICS nations are starting to collect, if that's going to be used in this BRICS currency system? How do you really see this unfolding?
Sure. So my main argument on this matter on de-dollarization has been the following. So most people, when they talk about de-dollarization, they refer to the efforts being made by the BRICS countries and other related countries, including countries like Iran and Venezuela and so on, to try to move away from the dollar. So they have been doing a lot of things trying to, the BRICS have created the new development bank, the contingency reserve agreement. There is also the various bilateral agreements among various countries to accept each other's currencies. There are other such initiatives. So all of these are very worthy and good. But at the same time, there is another issue with the dollar system, which is that all of these efforts that are being made by the BRICS and other such countries opposed to the dollar system, they may not be sufficiently advanced before the dollar system crashes, because the dollar system's problems don't just arise from the efforts made by BRICS countries and other countries. It also arises from the internal contradictions of the dollar system. Because one of the principal arguments in my geopolitical economy has been that, contrary to the huffing and puffing of an entire academic industry of scholars who have been devoted to making it look as though the dollar's world role is the most natural thing in the world. In fact, there's nothing that has been more unnatural, more unstable, more volatile, and ill suited to the needs of the world than the dollar system, the dollar functioning as the world's currency. And it has never functioned well. So it is riddled with internal contradictions. And of course, these contradictions have been mounting in recent years. As time goes on, they mature, they have become, and this has happened over a long period of time. But of course, Trump's shenanigans are making everything worse. So we were already, even before Trump was elected, at the point where the dollar system was already tottering, and now Trump has accelerated that process. So the dollar system is probably more likely to collapse on its own accord with the next financial crisis. And at that point, it may very well be that the arrangements that have so far been made by the BRICS countries may not be sufficiently advanced to cover all possibilities. And I'm only referring to the requirements of trade and investment transactions. I'm not even referring, obviously, all those people who are putting the ill-gotten gains in the dollar system, they probably deserve what's coming. But, how are you going to secure trade and investment payment systems? That becomes the question.
Yeah, it's to your point definitely about how the dollar has never really been positioned to be in this role to begin with, obviously, and when especially with the big beautiful bill, for example, you're only going to have higher and higher deficits that you're not even going to be able to collect with these, so quote unquote tariffs, because they're not even going to be realized. And, all these projections on tariff revenue is going to be, nonsense. And really where I think I would argue that the collapse, like you said, it's obviously already started. And for ironically, it's actually going to, it's day zero is really going to be when all of the pressure of all these deficits is going to weigh down on the American people in general. And this is something that we see with economic policy all across the world, really, because as the United States is trying this philosophy of, we don't need government nearly as much as we'd like to, we're going to get rid of all of the government revenue we can. And you see how it's impacting, things like social services and things like that. Well, the government is going to need to get revenue somewhere, or at the very least cut these deficits. So all of that pressure that the government was actually helping the private sector in is now going to weigh down on people like you and me, and coupled with higher inflation and quite frankly a lack of wage growth that you've really seen since the 80s, it's all going to come crashing down in on itself. It's a house of cards ready to collapse. Um, and so I guess what I'm wondering is that, like you said, there is kind of I think there are two camps when it comes to BRICS's involvement, I guess, in tariffs in this payment system. There's one where basically this needs to be priority number one, and you can already see the cracks in the foundation. So they need to do this at light speed and get this done as soon as possible. So there is an alternative ready for countries to use this in. BRICS is the alternative to the system that we are in. That's the point of BRICS. So why don't we do everything we can to establish this payment system as soon as possible? But then there's another side, because then there's another side that says when we look at making this payment system, we want to make sure that it doesn't have problems from the outset. So when we're developing this payment system, we need a 5 to 10 year, I guess, plan essentially to really test out and take out all the kinks in the payment system. So when it collapses, that it's ready to go without issue. And really that difference is and how people are taking that is it depends on what your relationship to the dollar is. You can put this at light speed when you don't have nearly as much of a trading relationship or as reliant on the dollar. So what I guess I wanted to ask is, how do you see with these countries, they all have their own national interests and their own they all have their own national interests and their own relationship with the United States and the dollar as a part of trade. How do you see that really unfolding as the cracks in the dollar system continue to fester, really?
Yeah, so this is, I mean, it's actually a huge question. So I think we can just deal with some of the highlights of the situation for now. So the first thing I would say is that, yeah, and one thing I probably forgot to say earlier, which is that the reason why the dollar system is likely to crash before the BRICS countries and other such countries have built alternatives to it is because, with the exception, I think, of China and Russia, I think that most of the BRICS countries or all the other BRICS countries have elites that are heavily invested in the dollar system in the sense that they, as I say, hide their ill gotten gains there. And the reason why this is important is that any serious alternative that will be stable, that will work, that will permit every country to pursue a path to development that works for that country, it makes it possible for every country to have the economic policy autonomy that it would need to pursue a viable path to development, will require capital controls. That means not allowing large amounts of money to go in and out of your economy as it pleases. Many people think that point out that the three odd decades immediately after the Second World War were among the most prosperous for the whole world. And one of the key reasons why that was the case was because in those days, the overwhelming majority of countries, including the rich countries and the developing countries and so on, had capital controls. And so capital controls are going to be very necessary, but these will be resisted by the most powerful people that control economic policy in countries like India, like Brazil, like South Africa. So that is why. That's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make is that obviously, a lot of people think, partly because the pound sterling in the past, the dollar since then, and so on, they have, they've all had their negative factors, but they've all served to some extent and however badly as world money. So most people think that the replacement for the dollar system will have to be another currency, say the renminbi or whatever. So However, there's something very wrong with this idea because what's wrong with the dollar system is that it is simply not true that the currency of the most powerful country or currency of any one country, not even the most powerful country, can be the currency of the world. There are some deep problems with it. And you were referring to the economic policy autonomy of different countries. Even if you're accepting the currency of another country, then you are already losing your economic autonomy. So the only way you can resolve this, you can tear this circle, is you have to create a currency, as John Maynard Keynes recommended at Bretton Woods, which is not the currency of any single country. So all countries would continue to use their own currencies. Indians would use rupees. South Africans would use rands. The Chinese would use the renminbi. Russians would use rubles, etc. But you would create a currency that central bankers can use in order to settle imbalance in the system periodically. And and so that would be really just a currency among central banks, and only that will be compatible with the capital controls, would be compatible with the autonomous development priorities of every country, and so on. And I think that this issue of capital controls is currently what's preventing the BRICS countries from advancing further towards creating alternatives. And to resolve this, really, what I'm saying is that the power of big corporate capitalist elites in countries like, well, in India, South Africa, Brazil in particular, will have to be tackled. Otherwise, those countries that already have capital controls, like Iran and what have you, will join China and Russia to create a rather different blocks, not necessarily including the current BRICS countries.
Yeah, you actually. I'm trying to like marinate in really what you're saying because it's actually I didn't think about the importance of capital controls actually. I guess as important as it is. And actually, if you read if you read books like on Karl Marx on discussing the inherent flaws of capitalism, you can actually kind of see how, like you said, how the lack of capital controls essentially uh, kind of guide the hand of important policymakers, or at the very least those who have the wealth or the capital, as we'll say in this at this point. It kind of guides that decision making. So if if you're in an economic system, or if your policy is guided towards maintaining your own security and autonomy, you can't let that capital and that wealth basically just chill up really to the top, where people that have that money and they, that influence that creates, that they can use it for their own means rather than the needs really for their nation in general. I have to really think about that. That's a very interesting one. But I am, unfortunately, we are out of time, and this is going to be the end of the first part of this interview. But I really want to thank you, Radhika, so much. This was an awesome discussion. I probably could go for another hour or two, but we have time limits. But again, I really do want to thank you, and for those who want to read more and watch more of your content, where can they find you?
Oh, sure. They can look for radhikadesai.com. I have a website, and it has most of my writings. You can also, of course, search me on YouTube. I do my own show, Geopolitical Economy Hour, but I also appear on many other shows like the one that Ben's just done. So just look for my name under YouTube, and you should find my work. But yeah, but the best place is radhikadesai.com. So please visit the website.
Yeah, I cannot agree more. Everybody, please go on and show Radhika your support. Go watch her content. Go read her books and her columns, because it's definitely worth the read, and it's definitely worth thinking over, because it's definitely shifted my own policy opinions. And I continue to always go back to and reflect at them at the whenever I do my own writing. But again, thank you guys so much for watching the video. Please be sure to hit like and subscribe. And as always, we'll see you next time. Hopefully, Radhika, we can get you on for another show very soon.
I'd love that. Thank you very much.